The United States imposed the most comprehensive sanctions in history on Iran, banned from global banking systems, frozen out of SWIFT, cut off from international oil markets, every major bank prohibited from processing Iranian transactions, every insurance company barred from covering Iranian cargo. The goal was economic starvation, deprive Iran of revenue, force capitulation, bring them to the negotiating table. It failed. Iran's oil exports just hit a 5-year high, 1.8 million barrels per day, generating roughly $40 billion in annual revenue, funding proxy forces across the Middle East, supplying drones that we analyzed in the previous investigation. How is this possible? Through an invisible armada of ghost ships that officially do not exist. Welcome to the shadow economy that makes sanctions irrelevant. This is the story of the ghost fleets, the invisible mechanism by which the global financial system is bypassed entirely. In this investigation, we are going to show you how tanker ships disappear from satellite tracking to conduct illegal transfers in the open ocean. We are going to explain the shadow banking networks using cryptocurrency and gold smuggling to move $40 billion without touching a regulated bank. And we are going to reveal why enforcement is mathematically impossible when complicit actors control the choke points. This is not about breaking the law. This is about building a parallel system where the law does not apply. Educational analysis only, not financial or geopolitical advice. Before we show you how the system is being defeated, you need to understand how sanctions are designed to function. Economic sanctions are a tool of coercion. The idea is simple. Cut off a country's access to the global economy. No ability to sell exports. No ability to buy imports. No access to international banking. The economic pain forces the government to change behavior, negotiate, comply. This model has been used for decades. Here's the traditional sanction structure. The U.S. Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, designates an entity, a government, a company, an individual. Once designated, American citizens and companies are prohibited from doing business with them. But the real power comes from secondary sanctions. If a foreign company does business with a sanctioned entity, that foreign company can also be sanctioned. This means losing access to U.S. markets, U.S. banks, and the U.S. dollar. For most international businesses, this is a death sentence. The mechanism works through the banking system. Every international transaction passes through correspondent banks. If a Chinese company wants to pay an Iranian company, the payment must route through banks that touch the U.S. financial system. SWIFT, the global messaging network for bank transfers, is the choke point. The U.S. can force SWIFT to disconnect Iranian banks. Without SWIFT access, Iranian banks cannot send or receive international payments. They are isolated. Insurance and shipping compound the pressure. Tanker ships carrying oil need insurance. Lloyd's of London and other major insurers will not cover Iranian crude. Without insurance, ports refuse to accept the cargo. Shipping companies will not risk their vessels. The entire supply chain freezes. This is how sanctions are supposed to strangle an economy. Cut the revenue, cut the imports, force compliance. And for most countries, this works, but Iran is not most countries. Let me show you how the system is bypassed. The key is invisibility. If you cannot be seen, you cannot be sanctioned. This is where the ghost fleet comes in. A ghost ship is a vessel that has turned off its automatic identification system, or AIS. Every commercial ship is required by international law to broadcast its position via AIS. This allows port authorities, coast guards, and other ships to track maritime traffic. It prevents collisions. It enables search and rescue. It creates a transparent maritime environment. But AIS is voluntary in international waters. A ship can turn it off. When it does, it disappears. Satellites can still see the physical ship, but without AIS, there is no identification, no name, no flag, no cargo manifest, just a hole on the water. The ship is a ghost. Here is how Iran uses ghost ships to export oil. The process starts at Karg Island, Iran's primary oil export terminal. A tanker docks and loads crude oil. At this stage, the ship is visible. AIS is on. The loading is documented. But the moment the tanker leaves Iranian waters, it goes dark. The AIS transponder is turned off. The ship disappears from tracking systems. The tanker does not head directly to its destination. That would be too obvious. Instead, it sails to a predetermined location in international waters. Common zones include the waters off Malaysia, Indonesia, or the South China Sea. These are areas with heavy maritime traffic and limited enforcement. The ghost tanker meets another ship. This second ship is typically registered under a flag of convenience. Panama, Liberia, the Marshall Islands, flags that ask no questions. The two ships conduct a ship-to-ship transfer. This is called an STS transfer. They moor alongside each other. Hoses are connected between the hulls. Oil is pumped from the Iranian tanker to the receiving tanker. This process takes 8 to 12 hours. During the transfer, both ships are stationary. They are visible on satellite imagery if someone is looking. But the ocean is vast. The probability of real-time detection is low. Once the transfer is complete, the Iranian tanker returns to Iran. The receiving tanker turns its AIS back on. It now broadcasts a different identity. The cargo manifest claims the oil was loaded in Oman, or the UAE, not Iran. The bill of lading is forged. The documents show a legitimate origin. The tanker sails to China. Chinese customs accepts the paperwork. The refinery processes the oil. The transaction is complete. The oil is laundered. The scale of this operation is staggering. Satellite analysis companies estimate there are 100 to 200 tankers operating in the Ghost Fleet. They conduct over 300 documented ship-to-ship transfers per year. Each tanker carries 1 to 2 million barrels of crude. The math works out to roughly 1.8 million barrels per day. This is not a marginal smuggling operation. This is an industrial-scale evasion network, and it is growing. In 2020, Iranian oil exports hit a low of 400,000 barrels per day due to sanctions pressure. By 2024, exports had recovered to 1.8 million. That is a 450% increase. The Ghost Fleet is not just evading sanctions, it is making sanctions irrelevant. Now, the oil is delivered. But how does Iran get paid? This is where the shadow banking network comes in. The traditional banking system is closed to Iran. Swift disconnection means Iranian banks cannot send or receive international wire transfers. But money, like oil, can be moved in the shadows. The first layer is front companies. Shell corporations registered in the UAE, Turkey, Hong Kong, and other jurisdictions with loose enforcement. These companies have no physical offices, no employees, just a registration and a bank account. A Chinese refinery does not pay Iran directly. It pays the Shell company. The Shell company invoices for trading services or logistics consulting. The payment clears through a bank in Dubai or Istanbul. The bank sees a payment to a UAE company. There is no obvious sanctions violation. The funds are transferred. But the Shell company is just a pass-through. The money needs to reach Iran. This is where cryptocurrency enters the system. The Shell company converts the funds into Tether, or USDT. Tether is a stablecoin pegged to the US dollar. It trades on exchanges with minimal identity verification. The Shell company buys USDT on a peer-to-peer exchange. No questions asked. The USDT is transferred via blockchain to a wallet controlled by an Iranian entity. The transaction is visible on the blockchain. Anyone can see that 10 million USDT moved, but the wallet addresses are anonymous. There is no name attached, no proof of Iranian ownership. Once the USDT is in an Iranian-controlled wallet, it can be converted back to local currency. There are black market exchanges in Tehran that will buy USDT for reals. The rate is worse than official exchanges, but it works. Iran receives the equivalent of dollars without touching the US banking system. The transaction bypassed SWIFT, bypassed correspondent banks, bypassed sanctions entirely. But cryptocurrency is not the only method. Gold smuggling is another critical channel. Physical gold is purchased with cryptocurrency in Dubai. The gold is shaped into small bars or jewelry to avoid detection. Couriers carry it across the border into Iran, often through Iraq or Pakistan. The Iranian central bank buys the gold. Gold reserves increase. The gold can later be sold for foreign currency when needed. Gold is sanctions-proof. It has intrinsic value. It cannot be frozen by the US Treasury. There's also direct barter. Iran ships oil to China. China ships industrial machinery, electronics, and consumer goods to Iran. No money changes hands. Both sides avoid the banking system entirely. The trade is balanced through government-to-government agreements. The US cannot sanction a barter transaction because there is no financial flow to intercept. The numbers are astonishing. Iran generates approximately $40 billion per year from oil exports. An estimated $30 billion is routed through shadow banking networks. $10 billion is handled through direct barter. The US Treasury can track perhaps $5 billion of this. The rest is invisible. Payments made in crypto wallets, gold bars, and barter deals that leave no paper trail. Let me walk through why this system is unenforceable. It is not that the United States lacks the will. It is that the enforcement problem is mathematically unsolvable given the resources available and the complicity of key actors. There are over 10,000 oil tankers operating globally at any given time. The United States Coast Guard operates 40 ships total. The US Navy has more ships, but they are tasked with military missions, not sanctions enforcement. Satellite monitoring can detect ships, but real-time coverage is limited. 70% of the ocean is not monitored in real time by commercial satellites. Cloud cover obscures another 30% of imagery. A ship-to-ship transfer takes 8 to 12 hours. If it happens in a gap in satellite coverage, it is invisible. The odds of catching a specific transfer are low. Even when a dark ship is detected, identification is difficult. Without an AIS signal, analysts must use visual characteristics. Ship size, hull shape, paint color. This is not precise. Ships can be repainted. Identification numbers can be altered. A ghost ship photographed on Monday may look different on Tuesday. International waters have no sovereign authority. A ship flagged in Panama is subject to Panamanian law, not US law. The U.S. cannot board or seize the vessel without permission from the flag state. Panama, Liberia, and Marshall Islands are flags of convenience. They register ships for a fee and ask no questions. When the U.S. requests cooperation, these countries often delay or refuse. The ship has moved on before any action is taken. Even if the U.S. identifies a sanctions-violating ship, the enforcement mechanism is slow. The ship must be added to the OFAC sanctions list. This requires evidence and legal review. By the time the designation is published, the ship has been renamed and re-registered. The cost to rename a ship and change its flag is approximately $50,000. The cost to build a new tanker is $100 million. The cost ratio is 2,000 to 1. It is cheaper to rename than to comply. China is the primary buyer of Iranian oil. China needs the oil. Its economy runs on energy imports. Iranian crude is sold at a discount, 15 to 20% below market price. This is attractive to Chinese refineries. Chinese customs accepts forged documents. When a tanker arrives claiming the oil is from Oman, Chinese authorities do not investigate. They process the shipment. The U.S. asks China to enforce sanctions. China refuses. It is not in China's interest to cut off cheap oil. The UAE, particularly Dubai, is a critical node in the financial network. Shell companies are registered there. Payments are processed through UAE banks. The UAE government knows this is happening. But Dubai profits from being a financial hub. Transaction fees, business licenses, real estate purchased by front companies. The UAE has little incentive to crack down. Shipping companies are also complicit. Operating a ghost tanker pays a premium. Because the cargo is sanctioned, the freight rate is higher. A normal tanker might charge $2 million for a shipment. A ghost tanker charges $4 million. The shipping company makes double. The crew is paid extra for the risk. Everyone in the supply chain profits except the enforcers. Blockchain transactions are public, but wallet owners are anonymous. The U.S. Treasury can see that 10 million USDT moved from wallet A to wallet B. But proving wallet B is controlled by Iran requires evidence beyond the blockchain. Cryptocurrency exchanges in jurisdictions with weak know-your-customer laws do not collect identity information. Peer-to-peer exchanges have no central authority. Mixing services obscure the origin of funds by pooling transactions and redistributing them. Tracing crypto payments is possible in theory. In practice, it is resource-intensive and often inconclusive. The shadow economy is not just Iran. Russia is evading oil sanctions using similar methods. Venezuela is selling oil through ghost fleets. North Korea smuggles coal and refined products. The total shadow economy for sanctioned commodities is estimated at $500 billion per year. The U.S. enforcement apparatus cannot monitor this volume. OFAC has a few hundred employees. They are responsible for sanctions on multiple countries, thousands of entities, and millions of transactions. The system is overwhelmed. But here is the deeper problem. Sanctions rely on cooperation. They work when the global financial system is unified. When every bank fears being cut off from the U.S. market, when every shipping company fears reputational damage. But as the shadow economy grows, the incentives shift. If half of global trade is routed through shadow channels, those channels become mainstream. The sanctions regime loses credibility. Countries and companies start to ask, why comply when evasion is easy and profitable? This is the paradox of sanctions in a globalized world. The U.S. built the global financial system: dollar dominance, SWIFT control, correspondent banking. But the same globalization that gave the U.S. this power also created the infrastructure to bypass it: cryptocurrency, offshore shell companies, flags of convenience, ship-to-ship transfers. These tools were not designed to evade sanctions, but they are perfect for it. And once the tools exist, they are used. Let me translate the ghost fleet economy into personal impact. Because when sanctions fail and shadow trade grows, the effects ripple into your life in ways you may not expect. Your gas prices are lower than they should be. Iranian oil reaching the market increases global supply. More supply means lower prices. If sanctions were working and Iranian oil was truly cut off, crude prices would be $5 to $10 per barrel higher. That would translate to 50 cents more per gallon at the pump. You benefit from cheaper gas. But that cheaper gas is funding the same Iranian operations that supply drones to proxies attacking U.S. interests. The economic benefit to you comes with a strategic cost. Your cryptocurrency faces stricter regulation. Governments see crypto being used to evade sanctions. The response is tighter regulation. Know your customer requirements, transaction monitoring, restrictions on peer-to-peer exchanges. If you hold Bitcoin or Ethereum, you will face more compliance hurdles. Exchanges will require more personal information. The privacy that made crypto attractive is being eroded because it is being weaponized by sanctioned states. Your maritime insurance costs are rising. Ghost ships operating without AIS create collision risks. A tanker running dark in a busy shipping lane is a hazard. Insurance companies are raising premiums to cover the increased risk. Those higher premiums are passed through the supply chain. The cost of shipping goods increases. The cost of imported products increases. You pay more for everything that comes by sea. Your foreign policy credibility is damaged. The United States uses sanctions as a primary tool of diplomacy. But if sanctions do not work, what leverage remains? Military force is expensive and politically unpopular. Diplomacy without enforcement is just talk. When sanctions fail visibly, adversaries learn they can ignore U.S. pressure. This emboldens more violations, more conflicts, more instability. And instability eventually costs you through higher defense spending, higher taxes, or higher global risk premiums on everything. This is the hidden cost of the shadow economy. It is not dramatic. There is no single crisis point. But the slow erosion of the rules-based system has compounding effects. When laws are unenforceable, compliance becomes voluntary. And voluntary compliance does not last. We have mapped the ghost fleet system, the mechanics of invisibility, AIS transponders turned off, ship-to-ship transfers in dark zones, forged documents at receiving ports, the shadow banking networks, cryptocurrency conversions, gold smuggling, direct barter, the enforcement failures, detection limits, jurisdiction gaps, complicit actors profiting at every node. Each stage is documented, each stage is mechanical, and the system is expanding. So how do you know when the shadow economy is growing beyond control, when evasion becomes the norm rather than the exception? There are 3 signals to track. Commercial satellite companies like Tanker Trackers, Windward, and Ursa track maritime activity. They publish reports on dark transfers. If the number of detected ship-to-ship transfers involving Iranian or Russian oil increases by 20% or more year over year, the ghost fleet is growing. This is a direct measure of evasion capacity. Watch for annual reports from these firms. If they show 300 transfers in 2024 and 360 in 2025, the trend is accelerating. Enforcement is losing ground. OPEC's secondary sources and tanker tracking firms estimate Iranian oil exports monthly. The data is published openly. If Iranian exports cross the 2 million barrel per day threshold despite sanctions, it confirms complete sanctions evasion. At that volume, Iran is exporting nearly as much as it did before sanctions. The restrictions are meaningless. Watch OPEC monthly oil market reports. If Iran's export figures keep rising, the shadow economy is winning. Blockchain analysis companies like Chainalysis and Elliptic track wallets linked to sanctioned entities. They publish reports on illicit finance flows. If transactions involving Iran-linked wallets increase by 50% or more in a quarter, the shadow banking network is scaling. This means more payments bypassing traditional banks. Watch for press releases from these firms when they detect major sanctions evasion campaigns. A spike in Iranian crypto activity correlates with expanded oil sales routed through shadow channels. Watch for these 3. If you see 1, evasion is active but contained. If you see 2, the system is under pressure. If you see all 3, the shadow economy has effectively replaced the formal economy for sanctioned actors. And at that point, sanctions are not a tool of coercion, they are a symbolic gesture. This has been the anatomy of the ghost fleet economy. Sanctions were supposed to isolate Iran, cut off revenue, force compliance, but isolation requires visibility, and visibility requires enforcement. The ghost fleet operates in the invisible, ships without transponders, payments without banks, documents without truth. We connected the mechanisms. In the previous investigation, we showed you how Iran's $20,000 drones bankrupt Israeli defenses. That asymmetric warfare requires funding, $40 billion per year. This investigation showed you where that funding comes from. Ghost tankers carrying oil, shadow banks moving money, crypto wallets hiding transactions, gold smuggled across borders. The revenue flows despite the sanctions. The war is funded despite the isolation. And there is a final piece to this puzzle. Those ghost tankers carrying Iranian oil, they all pass through 2 narrow choke points. The Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. 20% of global oil flows through those straits. If those choke points close, the ghost fleet stops. But so does everyone else. The global economy depends on those routes staying open. And that dependency is a weapon. In the next investigation, we will show you what happens when choke points become battlefields, when trade routes are held hostage, when the geography of the global economy becomes the strategy. The ghost fleet proves sanctions can be evaded. The choke point crisis will prove geography cannot. Stay informed. Watch the signals. And remember, in a globalized economy, invisibility is power. And the shadow economy just proved it has more power than the enforcers.